Hello, everyone, and welcome to POWERinU's complimentary webinar, an open dialogue on leadership development. Are we happy with status quo? Get to know more about POWERinU through this short video.
5 remarkable individuals. Benji Garcia, Penny Bongato, June Marfori, Elaine Cercado, Ed Reyes, armed with a common mission. They founded POWERinU Philippines. Grounded on 4 values, POWERinU helps harness the power of every person and team through value-adding services and solutions in consulting, training, and coaching. Our core values: customer-centric, change advocate, passionate learners, and entrepreneurial leaders. POWERinU offers a team of internationally certified, high-caliber trainers, consultants, and coaches with solid commercial experiences in various industries across Asia Pacific. POWERinU solutions are produced from global partnerships adapted for the Philippines. We invite you to journey with POWERinU to empower yourself and your teams.
Hello, everyone. I am Elaine Cercado, Director of POWERinU Philippines, and I welcome you to the complimentary webinar, an open dialogue on leadership development. Are we happy with status quo? Tonight's webinar will be a bit different from our usual format because we will have more time for open discussion and Q&A about our topic. So without further delay, let me introduce our speaker. Our speaker tonight is Leslie Hayward. Leslie worked across all of Royal Dutch Shell's key businesses over his 30-plus years with the company: upstream exploration and production, downstream marketing and trading, and products and technology in Malaysia, the Netherlands, and Singapore. His last position was VP HR, Southeast and Northeast Asia based in Singapore. While in Shell, Leslie balanced the company's organizational objectives with his personal and his team's purpose, championed the Asian agenda and Asian leadership, navigated the complex world of both Eastern and Western cultures, and a multi-generational workforce in an ever-changing environment. This gave him extensive experience in driving business transformation and the change management program needed to support various Shell businesses in embracing the energy transition and digital transformation. The transformation of the HR organization, which he was intimately involved with the HR organization, which he was intimately involved the transformation of the HR organization, which resulted in the modernization of the HR model, infrastructure, and leadership that was ready and willing to lead the thinking in conjunction with the business. During his tenure with Shell, Leslie sat on the board of directors of Shell Eastern Petroleum and the Shell Singapore Trustees Limited, and served as a member of the Singapore National Employers Federation Industrial Relations Panel. a member of the advisory board of Singapore Management University, Academy, and the Sarawak, which is in Malaysia, Leadership Institute for Civil Service. Leslie has the unique capability to bring people together, has a keen eye for human dynamics, fairness, and sound judgment. Able to see the big picture when things get complex, keeps a sense of humor when others see only despair. Leslie is a fellow of the UK Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development and a co-facilitator of National University of Singapore's Master of Science course on People Strategy and the SHRM, Sassen School of Management Thailand's Global Strategic HR Program. And so, let us all welcome our guest speaker tonight, Leslie Hayward. Les?
Thank you, Elaine, for that introduction. And very good evening to all the participants. And thank you for making time as well to be with us this evening as I share with you this particular topic around Asian leadership. So I think, to me, the burning platform or case for change is a very compelling one. So I, for one, am not satisfied with the status quo. Let me just share the answer upfront. What I plan to do in the next 15 to 20 minutes is to share with you some data points which made me come to that conclusion. And hopefully by the end of the session, we all can share the same conclusion, and more importantly, all share the same sense of urgency in terms of wanting to make a difference. So that would be my ambition in terms of what we hope to achieve this evening. So we live in a time where in a global business context, a lot of the energy has shifted from the West to the East, which is here in Asia. Many organizations have been focused on expanding its business footprint in Asia, including that of my former employer, Shell, where we saw the highest growth in terms of energy demand here in Asia. So it becomes a very natural focus on how Shell wants to develop its Asian talent. The macroeconomic picture, just go back to the intro slide first, before you come back to this slide, Trina. Thank you. So the macroeconomic picture is a frightening one. So within 10 years, the next 10 years, the oil demand coming out of China and India alone will take up the entire output of OPEC as we know it today. China is estimated to need at least 75,000 business leaders within the next 10 years. But the present supply is fewer than 5,000. So I think the same can be said of most other Asian countries in terms of the hunger for talent. So the march of Asian businesses moving into the new and profitable global market will not stop at any point in the near future. Rapidly scaling up from being the emerging markets of the past decades, Asia is now the powerhouse of the global economy. And let me just share with you a stat. It's a bit dated. It's a 2017 Fortune Global 500 list that says 197 are Asian companies, making it the continent with the highest concentration of companies, beating North America, 145, Europe, 143 for the first time. So in the past, there have been an over-dependence on foreign talent or expatriation. And typically when you talk about expatriation, they come from the headquarters countries. And in more cases, they're not, especially when it's multinational, they tend to be Westerners. So there is now a very strong push for localization or regionalization. So basically it's local leadership that are more sensitive to local markets that proves to deliver higher revenue and profit as compared to the more traditional and conventional countries that the MNCs are operating in. So multinational executive says that barely 10% of local managers are qualified to work in the organization. So needless to say, it's a crisis that's brewing in the business world, particularly here in an emerging Asia. And it has got nothing to do with the current pandemic. It just makes matters worse. So we really need to act, and we need to act fast. So I'm pleased to be invited to share with you the Shell's journey on how we have done Asian development and how it has evolved for progressing Asian leaders and how we develop them to be global leaders. And I hope that through this sharing, you'll be motivated and energized in wanting to embrace this very important agenda through the various capacities of positions that you are holding, and hopefully also in a position to be able to make a difference. It has been my passion, as you might have heard from Elaine, during my tenure in Shell, about wanting to make a difference on how we promote and progress and develop Asian talent. And a bit of a stats as well. So when we started this journey in 2017, the top Asian leaders made up 9% against a base load or best position of 1,500. And when I left Shell in 2020, it progressed to 10.7. So you can say that's a very modest number, but in terms of absolute effort and work needed, I can tell you that there was a lot of rolling up of sleeves and all hands on deck to get to where we were. And this was looking at particularly Asian in top C-suite positions and making sure that we also have a healthy emerging Asian talent in the pipeline for future roles. So I just want to make a qualification that I'm using the term Asian here in a very broad way, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that across Asia, we may have sort of, different degree of success of representation of Asians. So for example, if you look at South Asians and particularly from India, the Indians, they tend to fare better in terms of senior leadership role across MNCs. You could just name a few big companies today, Google, Microsoft, which are run by, headed by Indians, as compared to say East and Southeast Asians. So there is a hypothesis why that is so, but that's certainly not the focus of my sharing this evening. So let's make this a dialogue. I will go through 5 or 6 slides, and hopefully we have a time at the end to have a bit of conversation and answer some of the questions you may have. And I really like to make this a dialogue and not just a monologue where you just listen to me. And I really like to learn from the richness of each one of you as well from the virtual room. So we move to the next slide. So this is an overview of what I plan to share today. We will talk indeed about the Shell's journey of how we redefine the purpose of Asian leadership development and how they look like from the context of global leadership needs and Asian strength. And finally, the third bit is around the mindset that we need to uncover behind developing our Asian leaders. Just to manage expectation up front, I will not be sharing on the actual leadership intervention per se, but rather really the beliefs and the guiding principle that underpin the thinking and the approach that Shell took is what I want to impart with you this evening. And I feel that's probably more helpful in helping you understand how we came about with the thinking and how we designed the program as opposed to the program itself. I left Shell in October 2020, so it's been slightly over a year. So I did check back with Shell earlier this week as I was preparing for this evening's sharing in terms of where they are on this journey. And I was very pleased to hear from the person that was, sort of in the center of this, that the journey is still ongoing and they remain steadfast in terms of the intention around Asian leadership, Asian talent development in Shell. So that was very nice to hear. And and it just goes to show that this is not something you can crack overnight, and you really need to sustain yourself over time if you want to see the result. Before I move on to the next slide, I do want you to think and reflect on 2 questions. The first question is, what are the strengths of a leader? In your perspective, what do you see as a strength of a leader? Maybe note down one or two key attributes or strength, and we will come back to that later. And if time permits, we can have a bit of conversation around the second question, and that is, think of some Asian leaders today that you know of or you may have worked with, and make an assessment whether you think they will be successful, as successful in Asia as they would be if they are managing globally. For example, in a Western setting in Europe or in America, will they be as successful? I mean, one of the names that came to mind as I was thinking through this question was somebody like Jack Ma. We know that Jack Ma is homegrown in China, grew up in China, set up Tencent and Alibaba and so forth. But would Alibaba or would Jack Ma be as successful in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States? So anyway, think that through, and if we have time, we'll talk about it at the end of this presentation. So if we move to the next slide, Trina. Yeah, thank you. So this is a bit of a pivotal moment as we were thinking through what is it that we need to do to address this gap that we have in Shell around Asian talent. I think it's easy to come up with various intervention or various programs, but fundamentally, I think the question was, the question that we need to ask ourselves was the why, and what are we trying to achieve in doing this? So through the Asian Talent Council, now the Asian Talent Council is an in-house body that we set up in Shell. It's made up of very senior Asian business leaders as well as HR leaders. And they were given a mandate by the board of Royal Dutch Shell to look deeper into the issue of Asian representation across Shell and how can we push for a more robust Asian leadership succession for the C-suites in Shell. So it was a learning journey for us. The Asian Talent Council has been around for about 10 years. We were trying to figure out how do we make a difference. There were many slip, trips, and fall along the way. There were instances we were, had negative press from our Asian staff. They said, "Look, you guys in the Asian Business Council, what are you doing? You're not making any difference. You're not helping us." So yeah, it was a challenging journey for us. But I think the good news was we persevered, and I think we cracked the code somewhat when we came with this Asian leadership development, in terms of redefining the purpose, as opposed to what I said, just coming out with a suite of initiatives. So as we were thinking through this one, the fundamental question that we ask ourselves is, are we trying to fix Asians so that they can be more like their Western counterparts? I think remembering that Shell is a Royal Dutch, is a British Dutch company. So are we trying to say, if we want to fix the Asian, we want to make them be more like their Western counterpart, and that's the success, secret to success? But we felt that was not right. Yeah, it defeats this whole drive for diversity and the richness of the different, diverse group of employees that we have in Shell. So I thought, that would be wrong, and I don't think that will also be respectful of the different, perspective that people bring to the table. And the question was, we don't want to create a conformist of Western norm, leaders that are just conforming to Western norm, but rather we want people that actually bring value and value differentiation to the table. And that was my own personal journey as well. So I held a very senior role in HR in the region, and I'm actually the first Asian to hold that position. And there were many times in my interaction with senior leaders, be it from headquarters or Western leaders as they come and visit the region. How do I show up? Do I pretend to be like them, or do I stay true to myself? Yeah, and it was a constant dilemma for me in terms of how I show up. And if I show up one way or if I show up the other way, how would that impact my career in Shell? But I decided to take the higher ground in terms of I want to be myself, and that's the reason why I continued working for Shell 30 years, because I can be myself, and I don't have to be what in terms of being a conformist. And that was very important to me because coming to work every day, you want to be able to perform and you want to be able to be yourself, because I think that's where you can perform at your best. And so that's how I guided myself. And I said, look, I clearly have my own strength. I clearly have my own values. And those are the things that I should amplify and make that difference. And, I survived 30 years. I became one of the senior HR leaders. I guess that formula worked for me. And that's something that whenever I get the opportunity to encourage people, I said, be yourself and don't be shy to amplify your strength. And that was the thinking behind this whole Asian leadership program that we developed. I think it was all too easy just to try and make people look more Westerner when they have their own values and their own strength. And that's how we shape the thinking behind this program. So the aha moment, if you move to the next slide, please, is really when we made that shift about how we want to bring Asian perspective to the global table. Yeah, and how we want to develop Asian leaders, not just to be great in their home turf, but also Asian leaders that will be successful and will try to be strong global leaders. And Shell being a multinational, we need people that that are not just playing at the home league, but can play in the international league. So with that sort of thinking, we shape the various interventions and the program that were designed to basically realize this. So if you go to the next slide. So this is a bit about the various research that we did, surveys that we did. So when Shell was looking at the global leadership needs of the future, it was also understood that leaders everywhere needs to be developed to be effective global leaders. So it's not just a leadership needs for Asian leaders, but it's really for all leaders in Shell, but also recognizing that there might be instances where leaders from Asia, or Asian leaders, may be lacking in a certain sets of leadership attributes versus their counterparts from the West. Similarly, we also look at leadership in a digital context. I think that was very important when we did this piece of work to think through that one, because the world is going to be more digital. That was before pandemic, so we didn't know about this new ways of working and working from home and virtual working. But I think the whole drive towards this whole digital thing was already very alive at that point in time. So I'm glad we did that, because that gives a bit of a head start with this pandemic in terms of how we want to develop leaders in the more digital world. And as we look at leadership in this digital context, it calls for similar themes as well. So you look at the engagement, humility, adaptability. So you can see that although the terminologies used may be different, but there are a lot of commonalities with with the Shell leadership needs. So the basic ingredients were set up. You can see that on the left side of the slide in terms of the framework for the leadership needs. However, if you go to the next slide, so we also managed to get some work done by CCL. They actually, through that research, uncovered some of the behaviors that actually hindered the progression of Asian leaders to their full potential. So for example, Asian leaders, and I hope some of this you recognize and resonate with some of you in this call this evening. Asian leaders tend to be, or rather Asian tend to be non-confrontational, and we like to avoid having difficult conversation. We prefer not to uproot our families and generally less mobile than say the Europeans or the Americans. Again, want to make a caveat here in terms of mobility. It does vary with different nationalities, and I know Filipinos, by and large, if you compare with your Southeast Asian counterpart, Filipinos are generally far more mobile than say Singaporeans on the other end of the scale. Singaporeans are really not, well, less mobile, and they're very comfortable in their city state, and they're perfectly happy to stay and not be uprooted. And that has created a whole host of issues as well. Asian nationalities, we tend not to talk about the I. We tend to emphasize on the we, the collective bit in conversation. And that's also very true in a Chinese context. Certainly some of my experiences when I had dealings in China, it was always we. And I don't know whether the communist ideology has got something to do with it, but very, very prevalent in China. And as a result of some of these gaps or tendencies, Asian talents do not show up as well in our talent conversation in Shell. Yeah, you can say it's unfair. You can say that it's prejudice but biases. But that's what it is. And unless we do something about it, Asian could still be unfairly judged and therefore not being progressed based on their true worth and their true capability. So this was the CCL, and then Shell, through our Learning and Development Organization, they did their own study as well. And surprisingly, the three themes that came out, again, it does resonate against the Asian tendencies, were around courage, curiosity, and strategic storytelling, were the three gaps that were quite pronounced with the Asian population in Shell. And that helped us to zoom in terms of the intervention that we developed afterwards. And the intervention, mind you, this is not the magic formula. It doesn't mean that if you crack this, it's all hunky-dory and Asians will get progress and they will be well represented in the C-suite. It's not. It's just one of the many legs or initiative that we did. But certainly this was a very important one because it has a different spin to the thinking and the beliefs than the more traditional way of addressing this problem. So, and this journey itself had full support of very senior Asian leaders themselves. It has full support of the board, which is also very important in order to make it sustainable. So we had all the support and that was really, really good as we started this journey. Can you move to the next slide, Trina? So I just want to share a little bit about, and this is clearly, I'm sure you all recognize this being Asian yourself, but these are some of the things that, the Asian culture and thinking that does have effect in terms of how the Asian tendencies are being influenced. It cuts through our day-to-day living context. Food or meals are all very important for us in most part of Asia. And it's not uncommon to see business deals being transacted over a meal or sometimes over a game of golf. And that's very true in China, in Malaysia, in Indonesia. And here in the Philippines, it's also not uncommon for team meetings, and I certainly saw that with my HR team here in the Philippines, to have meetings, and then it gets organized over lunch and or dinner, and there will be a whole, spread of snacks being provided. So for someone who's from the West, or even for me as a Malaysian, some of these nuances are quite different. And it took me a while to adjust. And I remember asking my HR manager here in the Philippines, every time he submits a claim for all these expenses, I was like, why all these meals? What are they for? And I was quickly reminded that this is quite common here in the Philippines, that we have team meetings, we bring all the snacks and the food, and sometimes we run, finish it off with lunch or dinner as well. The other thing is we see ourselves as one amongst others from the perspective of we or us. We have a very collectivist mindset versus a more individualistic mindset of the West. The Thai culture, for example, it's all about we. And then when I was dealing with my colleagues from Thailand, and when you want to recognize someone for a work well done, it is very difficult for them to sort of say, yes, I deserve this because I was the one who was involved. It was always a we. It was always involving a whole team that should take equal credit in doing that piece of work. So that was a bit of a learning for me as well. The other bit is how we approach problem here in Asia. Sometimes the way to approach an issue is not to deal with it directly, or grab the bull by the horn, as they say it. But we like to work around it, work around the parameters. We don't normally like to throw our colleagues under the bus, so to speak, even when we know that this particular person was the one who actually made the mistake or hadn't delivered as promised. But somehow the Asianness in us will never throw this person under the bus. Yeah, we will come up with a long song and dance why this problem happened, and it was never this person's fault. It was always our fault, and yeah. So it's how we, I guess, being brought up. So the other oversimplification is that in a Western culture, they are characterized by talking, understanding, and listening, and contrasting that with the Asian style, which we tend to be more listening, understanding, than talking. So such misalignment, more often than not, creates a wrong misperception of a person's capability. And it was numerous times I hear when we talk about Asian talent that I hear remarks be made that this person is so quiet, he or she doesn't express himself or herself. How can we have confidence that he or she can do this more senior role? Time and time again, I have to remind these people, it's always relative to how much you guys talk in a Western culture. You guys talk too much. Yeah, conversely, you don't judge the content and the capability of an Asian just because this person is relatively more quieter than you are. Yeah, so you always get into a very interesting debate, but I always like to put the mirror in front of them, and I hope you guys recognize some of this as well. So at the end of the day, it's not a question about compromising our Asian values when we want to be more like the West, but it's, I believe that values should stay core. Whatever values we have across the organization, it should stay core. I don't think we compromise that. I think, culture and some of this bit that I'm sharing, I mean, it does leave room for adaptation, not just for the Asians, but also for the Westerners. I think both need to play a part in order to address each other better. But in terms of core values, you shouldn't compromise that. I think that should remain intact. I'm just being mindful of time, so I need to speed up a little bit. So if I go to the next slide. So I asked you the strength of an Asian leaders that you know of. I'm going to show you very quickly a study done by Deloitte, if we move to the next slide. And basically, we don't have time to discuss it, but see how many of this piece of work that Deloitte came up with resonates, Deloitte and CCL resonates with what you you jot down as well. So these are, the 6 strengths. It's important to remember that we do have strengths as Asian or Asian leaders. So these are the 10, rather the 6 strength that CCL research on, not Deloitte, sorry. The next slide. So this is the one that Deloitte did. So Deloitte also did some work on this in terms of future works and leadership. So they came up with three themes there, as you can see: energizing, empowering, and connecting. And if you overlay that with the Asian strength, the 6 Asian strengths that CCL, the research done by CCL, you will see a big overlap as well. So it was good to know that, it complements each other, and it gives us peace of mind as well as we work through the intervention, that external research are also broadly in line with what it is that we're trying to achieve. So it's not, a Shell thing that's unique to Shell. It's good to know that there is a broader application as proven by the work, the research work done. Okay, we'll move to the next slide. And this is my last slide. And this was the third piece around the mindset. And probably this is the most challenging one that we had to address. So you bring the tools, you bring the intervention, you bring the support, you bring the coaches. Like the saying, you can bring a horse to water, you can't make it drink. And there it boils down to mindset. Yeah. So we need to consciously question our mindset as Asians. And remember, today in Asia, this is our space and our moment. And I think we should grab it. Yeah. In a global perspective, we continue to bring value differentiation, an experience that's different from what others will bring to the table. So let's showcase this and continue to earn our right at the table. We need to develop Asian leaders that have confidence in themselves. They can be equally as good as any. And as Asians, we need to have the inner drive and the motivation to be developed. Yeah, I mean, we need to be able to want to be better. Yeah, and wanting to grab that opportunity. And to thrive in a business world today, leaders need to understand, empathize, respect, and adapt to each other culturally, and to hold through to our voice, because we are leaders, regardless of where we're from, East or West. And we all need to put our voice in the room and be successful in leading the organization. So to me, as I said earlier, the status quo is not acceptable. And we must all take our Asian leadership development to heart. And we need to shake the tree and make a difference. Yeah, and I think this caption and the quote from Lee Kuan Yew says it all as well, in terms of how Singapore grew to be one of the successful city-state today, because Lee Kuan Yew was just simply not happy with status quo, and he didn't think that the British are the only ones that can do a better job than the local Singaporeans when they gain independence. All right. So with that, Elaine, I'm just cognizant of time, and I want to give the floor back to you to facilitate the session.
Thank you, Les. Wow, very enlightening, empowering, encouraging for us, Asian leaders, Asian talents. We encourage you now to send your questions through chat, and we'll try to ask them tonight for as long as time permits. We have participants here live in Zoom. We also have participants in FB Live, and of course, we did receive sent-in questions from registrants who might not be here tonight, but will be probably be viewing our recordings through our YouTube channel or our website. Thank you so much, Les, for that wonderful presentation and sharing. And as we're waiting for some of the questions, let me go through some of the sent-in questions first. Well, firstly, from my end, I found it very interesting. I actually have a few questions as well from my end, and this is just to start off. Probably some of the questions in the mind of those who are present here tonight in the chat, well, in the Zoom, and then also in the Facebook Live. Unless you mentioned that question, that you had a question about who is successful from Asian leaders in your mind. You mentioned who might make it or who can become successful globally. You mentioned Jack Ma as one. Yeah, I'm curious about that. What makes you think Jack Ma, or I don't know, is it Jack Ma from your perspective, and what makes you think it's Jack Ma?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. If you look at Jack Ma's background, from an education point of view, it's pretty basic, right? He got admitted to university at the third attempt and finally graduated with English literature, and then he started his career as a teacher, teaching the language. So he was not your Harvard or Stanford or whatever. But I think, his success could be attributed to what I call grit, G-R-I-T.
Grit.
Some of you might have read that book. And it could be a style that may resonate with most Asians. It's really hard work.
Yeah.
Roll up your sleeves, get to work at 6 a.m. in the morning, come back, don't finish till 5, have a very short lunch break, and work on Saturday too, because Jack Ma was advocating that we work full day on Saturday, remember? But I think that style could only work in China and perhaps some part of Asia. Try that in Europe or try that in the United States, and you get your trade unions after you. And I've worked in the Netherlands, and I know the Dutch style. When it's working time, they're really serious about working. There's no coffee break. There is no meals over meeting. There's no snack. But when it's 4 o'clock, they go back. And then when it's their holiday or public holiday, don't expect them to pick up your phone or respond to your email. Forget it. Yeah. So I think the short story, the short answer to your question is, I doubt if Jack Ma will survive his office in Chicago, Illinois, but he in Guangzhou. I don't think he's a global leader in that sense.
He's not in that sense. And I could relate with you, Leslie. When I was working corporate for a long time, 20 years, I've had bosses where I couldn't get in touch with them after work. Well, when I say after work, like after 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. Philippines time or Singapore time, and yeah, and that was because that was their culture, that was their way of life and working, and of course I had to respect that. But at the same time, we, as you said, Asians would work till late night or weekends. We didn't mind, in fact, even being called, even on weekends. So yeah, very true. One more question from my end, and I'm seeing now a question also on the chat box, but just a follow up on that. So you mentioned about being yourself. In fact, that was one of the keys that you also lasted very long in Shell. Being yourself, being true to your strengths, to yourself in a corporate, in the workplace. My question, I guess, is there any point where you compromise that or you balance that to, for a greater, I guess, greater purpose, greater good, or a situation that calls for it in the business?
Yeah, I'm thinking of example. I think it was a dilemma for me, as I've shared earlier, working in British, Dutch, Western company and being a senior Asian leader, or at least as I was emerging to be a senior Asian leader, how do I want to show up? And there are many instances where the inclination was to be more like them, as opposed to be myself. But this is where, and the bit that I shared in the slide as well, the one that I did not compromise, Elaine, be it West or East, are the values, right? The shell values. And how I manifested that was, I would have done that in the West, I would have done it it's just how I uphold the shell values. There was a fair bit of cultural adaptation that I need to make, which I thought was just about the compromise that I was willing to make. But it had its moment, I can tell you that, because one of the things that I've been called out many times in terms of my leadership style was my bluntness and my directness. But I always say, I may not be as, the finesse of a typical Asian about being, so spoken. I tend to be a bit more Dutch-ness in me. But I said, well, I will not apologize for that, but you can call it out if I do not do that respectfully.
Okay.
All right? Because that's the value I uphold. The cultural adaptation, I try to manage that, but I'm not always successful given the spread of the geography I deal with. How I deal with the Filipinos, for example, will be very different from how I deal with the Thais, right? With the Thais, you really, really have to be soft-spoken. Otherwise, it will be tough to get them to listen to you. I think the Filipinos are a bit more hardened. You can deal with them a bit differently. At least that's my experience.
Okay. Thank you for that, Leslie. And I from my perspective, I also agree with you that values, that's a non-negotiable, so to speak. From my perspective as well, absolutely. I want to read to you one question that came to the chat box. If you think 2 to 3 qualities that successful Asians have demonstrated in global roles, especially in the light of the pandemic era, where location and uprooting are not necessary, what would they be?
I would think empathy is one. And the reason I say that, if you say you overlay that with the current pandemic, Asia, Southeast Asia is one of the worst hit region, right? By this virus. Granted that within Southeast Asia, Singapore, for example, is at a different end of the scale, say, versus Indonesia or the Philippines. Now, if you have a leader sitting in London or sitting in Houston versus a leader who sits in the Philippines or Jakarta, I think you get more empathy and understanding from the person who is living and breathing the same air and dealing with this crisis than somebody from Houston, right? So I would think that one of the strengths that will amplify itself during this crisis is probably this whole empathy bit. And I think Asian, with the strength that we have, hopefully that actually shown itself during this crisis.
Okay, so empathy. Yep, definitely. People who are based here, well, in the Philippines and in Asia in general, will definitely understand much better what we're going through or we've been going through this past 2 years, right? Inciting another question on the chat box just now, Leslie. Inciting the example of Asians who demonstrate flexibility, hard work such as the long hours and weekends. Would global counterparts might interpret this work ethic as inefficiency? Or in your broad experience, have you seen this perception or risk?
Yeah, let me share a story. So this is the time when I was working in The Hague. So I was a very young me then, working in The Hague in the Netherlands. And I was in my 4th or 5th year in service with Shell. So I've been sort of onboarded by Shell in Malaysia before I went to Holland. So, and thinking that the longer I work, the better my prospect for progression would be, the longer hours I work. And I make sure that my bosses will see me.
Yep.
Notwithstanding the fact that some of the bosses will leave at 4 o'clock sharp. But my conscience tell me I must stay longer. And make sure I send the emails that says it's past 5 or 6 p.m. And then I did that once or twice. And then one fine day, my boss called me to the room and he said, Leslie, can you please sit down? I've just received this notification from security. And security has alerted me that you've worked past the office hours for X number of times. And security asked me to tick these boxes as my response to their query. Why are you working over the time normal office hours? One is you are not productive, i.e. you're not competent. Second is you're overworking your staff. So, and then my boss is that don't ever do that again. Because there wasn't a third box that says because you're hardworking and you deserve a progression. It was either you're not competent and therefore you take longer to finish the work, or secondly, you as the boss, you're understaffed and you're making your staff work too hard.
Yeah.
So I learned very quickly after that says longer doesn't mean better.
That's right. That's right. So when we are busy and we are, we seem to be very full in our in our calendars, in our activities, doesn't mean we're productive, right? As they say, the busyness, the long hours that we put doesn't necessarily equate with that.
This is about prioritization, right?
Yeah.
It's about being focused on what's the one that gives you the biggest bang for the buck.
Yeah.
And the biggest added value.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we get distracted. We'll be doing lots of low added value stuff and we'll spend an enormous amount of time and then very little time left or no energy left to do the real
to do the most important stuff. That's right.
And the learning, again, bringing back this old Asian tendency, Elaine, is Asians, by and large, find it very difficult to say no.
No. Yeah.
So every time we get a task, no matter how, pardon my French, shitty it is, we will say, yes, sir. Oh, yes, ma'am, we'll do it. Yeah. We need to learn to say no. Or you have asked me to do this 5 other things. You tell me where your priority is.
Which one? Yep. Which one should be on top?
Help me so that I know how to prioritize if we have a misalignment. And that's a very good conversation to have as well, which I do, and I do encourage my staff back then to do that with me as well.
It is a challenge, Leslie, because for those who, of course, who live in that culture where and thrive in that, and and it's not just in the office; it's everywhere, right? At home, and so that's part that's ingrained, to say yes most of the time and do things for as long as we can. Kaya natin to in Tagalog,
And I just a word of caution, don't try and apply this in every organization you're working in.
Yeah.
You might be turned the door and you blame it on me afterwards.
So adaptation, not just culturally, but organization culture as well, right? Is very important. I mean, culturally, geographic, but the organization culture. I was just notified, time check, we're down to the last question. And so, I guess I'll take one from a previous question sent in. Is there any advantage to governance? I mean, in terms of leadership style, there are differences in terms of the leadership between the East and the West. But is there any point where there is a more advantageous leadership style between the two when it comes to governance. And it is quite broad. The person didn't specify
Yeah,
governing which body.
yeah.
I guess
I,
in broad
I,
terms, yeah.
I can give, I can give answers on both perspective, I guess. I think regardless of the West or the East, I dare say that trust is earned as opposed to trust being given, right? Whether you're a British guy or you're a Filipino, I doubt if we would say, I trust you from day one,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to say, you have to earn your trust. I think that's quite uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, if a line manager, say in a British context, a
Mm-hmm.
line manager tells their staff, a British staff, to do something which is perceived as not right, it's more highly likely that the British staff will put their hands up, or the Dutch for that matter, I'm more familiar with, to say no. But the Asian, because of our respect for hierarchy and respect for seniority and age and what have you, even if our gut tells us that is probably not right,
Mm-hmm.
we might still say yes, violate the governance simply because my boss told me to do so.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's about the time left. Thank you for answering that, Leslie, and thank you for answering all the questions that we had in detail. There are many more questions that came in, actually, sent in via the registration, and also a few more that came in through the chat box. So we'll probably just send you, and if you do have the time, probably just share whatever answers you might offer to those questions. We really appreciate that. And so, Leslie, we appreciate your time here tonight. We appreciate your inputs, your sharing, your presentation, your sharing of your time, your experience, your knowledge. It's been very, very, for me personally, very encouraging, very enlightening. And I'm sure our audience here in Zoom and also in FB Live, and those who will be watching this recording will feel the same way. So thank you so much, Leslie.
It's my pleasure, Elaine. And sorry, I went a bit over time with the slides, and otherwise we could have more time for Q&A. But yeah, I'll be happy to go through the questions and respond as appropriate. But thanks again, and thank you everyone for making time as well. Cheers.
Thank you, Leslie. And we still have a few announcements that we'd like to share with you. And so you don't miss out in any of this. We'd like you to subscribe at www.powerinU.com.ph to get updates on events, webinars, and free resources from POWERinU and its partners. Our webinars for 2021 have ended, and we thank all of you who have learned, who have grown with us through our monthly complimentary webinars. But we won't stop there, as we will be welcoming 2022 with new and relevant topics. January will also usher in our fourth year of offering webinars available to the public. 4 years na! So as to celebrate this milestone, we invite you to register to our webinar on January 12, 2022 with Penny Bongato as our speaker. Penny is a POWERinU director, and she has been listed as one of the top 100 most inspirational Filipino women on LinkedIn this 2021, ranked number 13. Penny is also the first Jack Canfield certified trainer in the Success Principles in the Philippines, and first in Asia, and also now a certified trainer in Canfield methodology. Many employees are now being asked to go back to their office or work sites. However, some people have become too used to being isolated at home or just engaging with colleagues virtually that their confidence took a blow. So the question is, are you ready? Are you ready and confident to go back on site? Are you physically and mentally prepared for this? How can you rebuild your confidence in the new normal of the workplace? So join us. in this webinar to rebuild, enhance, and develop your self-confidence, especially at the start of the year. Everyone who registered in this webinar will automatically get an email invite to our next webinar. So we hope to see you again on January 12th. Lastly, everyone can access the recording of this webinar through POWERinU's website, Facebook page, and YouTube channel. And finally, before we end, we'd like to just take a request for 10 seconds. So 10 seconds of your time to answer this short poll so we can get your feedback on this webinar. Thank you so much in advance for those who will be sharing their feedback. We want to continuously improve. So just click that in the chat box or scan the QR code you see on the screen. Your responses will definitely help us continuously improve in providing this complimentary webinar to you. So thank you again for joining us. And while you're filling up that feedback survey, I'd like to greet everyone an advance Christmas greeting from Team POWERinU and see you again in 2022. Goodbye.